Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your patience. We were facing some technical difficulties, but we are ready to get the show on the road. Firstly, I would like to welcome Chef Youssef Jubassini today. Welcome, Chef. Thank you for joining us. If you can please start by giving us a brief introduction about yourself.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Ms. Farah. Thank you for being here today. First of all, I would like to thank Goody and Zadak for sure for giving us this opportunity to talk to you, to this, inshallah, to be an informative webinar. First of all, I'm Youssef Al-Jawassini. I'm a culinary instructor here at Zadak. I have studied culinary in Jordan, back in Jordan. And after that, I have already continued my BA in business administration. I have worked in multiple places in Jordan and UAE, and for sure now in Saudi Arabia. I have started my career as a commis chef. After that, I got promotion into the demi chef de partie, and the senior chef de partie also back in Jordan. My profession in barista started when I was demi chef de partie, when I was working next to a barista or coffee corner in the same hotel. It all started with the aroma or the smell of the coffee while it's roasting and while it's grinding. So from that moment, I decided to explore more about coffee. And also, I was working as a chef in the morning, and also I was joining this coffee corner, especially in the afternoon, in order to explore more about this, let's say, fascinated or interesting beverage, which we all fell in love with.
Wonderful, Chef. Thank you very much for that introduction. Um, Many coffee enthusiasts have joined us today, looking to expand on their coffee knowledge. And I do believe that in order to understand something fully, we have to go back to how it all began. So if you can start with the history of coffee, kindly elaborate for us on the history of the coffee bean itself and coffee industry in general.
Yes, definitely, for sure. I already prepared a presentation, which I will be sharing with you right now. So first of all, this is the scope of the webinar today. Definitely, we are going to dive deep in the barista profession, the brief history of coffee industry and coffee today. They've been built in the most countries or the most exporter of coffee beans nowadays. They've been built harvesting coffee and the process, the stages of the roasting of the coffee, and for sure displaying and discussing coffee grind chart, major coffee producers around the world, and the coffee industry, especially in Saudi Arabia. And the last thing, which is numbers and statistics of the global coffee industry. Now, before going into the history, I just want to explain what is coffee. Coffee is basically a beverage prepared from a brewed, roasted, and ground coffee beans. Definitely, we will know later on what are the coffee beans, the varieties of the coffee beans, the roasting stages, and for sure, definitely the grinding, which definitely, and the impact of the grinding on the overall drink. So it might be darkly roasted, bitter, and slightly acidic for sure. Coffee has a stimulating effect on humans primarily due to its caffeine content. So we all know that a coffee has a specific caffeine content, and later on in the coming slides we'll definitely deep in this caffeine content, and we know how much the content of the caffeine in 1 cup of coffee. And for sure, it might reach 150 milligrams in some coffee drinks because it depends on the intensity and the amount of the coffee in the drink as well. So it has the highest sales in the world market for hot drinks. A brief history about coffee. When coffee was discovered, is basically this was back in Ethiopia, back in centuries in Ethiopia. There was a sheep or the goats, and their herder was called Kaldi. This sheep or this called herder, he first discovered that the potential of these beloved beans. How did this discovery began? Basically, after noticing that his goats is basically get uh, get energetic after eating from this specific plant, this specific plant or this specific food. So he noticed that they got, as I said, energetic, more energetic after eating this specific plant. After that, he took this plant or he took this fruit and tried it himself. And he also noticed that he could not fall asleep at that night. After that, Mr. Kaldi, the one who already discovered this beans, he reported his findings also to keep him alert. So he reported that this plant or this beans kept him alert throughout the night, and he could not fall asleep after that. So coffee cultivation and trade also began in the Arabian Peninsula. By the 15th century, coffee was being grown in the Yemeni district after it's been discovered in Ethiopia. After that, during the 19th century also as well, coffee houses in India became more popular. Coffee houses in India became more popular, and they were also a group of businessmen were used to meet in the and socialize while eating this interesting beverage.
Thank you, Chef Yusuf, for that. Um, what would you say are the fundamentals to understanding coffee varieties and understanding coffee in general from a barista's point of view or from a roaster's point of view?
Yeah, definitely. The fundamentals, as a coffee professional, you need to understand the fundamentals or the foundation of the coffee. So when I was working as a chef, I have decided already to go, as I mentioned, to discover and to explore more of this energetic and the beans as well. So I have decided to go and visit a plant or the farm where the coffee beans were planted as well, and to go through all the process from the planting as well to reach to the cup. It is a very interesting journey. It is a very interesting process to see all of the development, starting from the bean or the fruit itself, in order to reach to the processing, grinding, roasting, for example, and for sure to prepare the nice drink, the nice coffee drink at the end. Now, we will talk about coffee today. We have already talked about the coffee in the past. I will go through the coffee today as well. Coffee have never been more interesting than it is today. You cannot walk in any street today without seeing any coffee houses, especially the specialty coffee houses as well. So what defines basically a specialty coffee houses, as you all have been noticed definitely, that more the most of the coffee houses they write that a specialty coffee house. What does specialty means? Specialty means that they basically focus where the coffee comes from and how the impact of how this impacts the taste as well. This focus has influenced how cafes brews, sell and serve a coffee as well. So it's not only about how the or the origin of the coffee beans. It's basically it's a whole journey. It's a whole experience on how the coffee was harvested, how it was processed, how it was roasted, grinded, prepared, and the whole image. So today there's a coffee shop definitely for every taste. We are not all sharing the same taste. So you will definitely find a coffee shop for every taste. Now I will dive into the introduction of the barista profession. In the past, the word barista, it's an Italian origin, translates bartender or someone who works behind the bar in cafes or bars as well. It derives from an Italian word which is bar, referring to the counter where drinks are served. Basically, the bar is a place where the drinks are served in the past and nowadays as well. In Italy, the term specifically refers to someone who is skilled in preparing and serving traditional coffee drinks like espresso in cafes. So this is the history of the barista world. After that, in modern as well, today barista is used worldwide to refer that experts in crafting coffee beverages. So the experts in crafting the coffee beverages, particularly in specialty coffee industry, as I mentioned, a barista's role has evolved simply serving coffee to becoming more professional who enhances the coffee experience throughout precision and skills. What are the required skills for the barista? Basically, or specifically mastering espresso preparation, latte art, and equipment calibration. Equipment calibration is a very essential part of a coffee professionalist. Now, we will talk about the coffee fruit. As I mentioned, coffee is basically a fruit. So the size of the fruit of the coffee is basically are the size of the small grapes, are similar to the size of the small grapes. Most of the volume of the fruits provided by the central seeds. So the seeds, they already they are a big part of this fruit. Also, there is a thin layer of fruit flesh under the skin, which is called a silver skin. Now, in the coming slide, we will definitely show a picture of the composition of a fruit or a coffee fruit. So all cherries start out green. So all the cherries of the coffee fruit starts basically green, and they develop deeper colors as the fruit matures. Coffee bean is made up of several layers. Most of them will be removed during the process. Now, as I mentioned, the coffee beans it starts in green color, then turns into yellow, then turns into the red. Allah. What reflects the red color of the coffee fruits is basically the ripeness. So the more ripe the coffee fruit, the more red color they will develop after. So as well as it is reflected also to the amount of the sugar content in the coffee fruit itself. However, that does not mean that all harvesters they collect the coffee fruit when it is completely ripe. Some of the harvesters or some of the producers they recommend or they like to harvest their coffee beans in different stages, not only at the last stage, which is the mature stage. Also, some believe that a mixture of coffee fruits, when it was green or whether it is green, yellow, or red, that this gives a distinctive flavor for the final product or for the final coffee product. Now, in this slide, you can see that the composition of the makeup of the coffee fruit. We're starting from the outer skin, which is as I mentioned, might be green, yellow, and red at the final stage, and the pulp after the outer skin, mucilage, parchment, silver skin, and the coffee bean itself and the coffee bean itself. So as I mentioned, the seed has a protective outer layer called parchment, then a layer wrapped, which is around the bean, which is called silver skin. As you can see, it's a very thin layer. It's a very thin layer that coats the coffee bean or the coffee seed. Now, coffee varieties. We all know that we have the most popular coffee varieties are the Arabica and Robusta. And in the coming slide, I will definitely deep, I will deep dive in the varieties of the Arabica and Robusta as well. But before getting into that, we have to know that Arabica coffee has different varieties because much of the world coffee has always been and still treated by origin. I can barely say that, I have never asked someone who said exactly the type of the coffee, which is mentioned in the slide, Bourbon or Mondo Novo or S795. You will mostly hear that this is Arabica and this is Robusta. That's why now coffee nowadays are traded by the origin of the coffee beans, by the origin of the coffee beans. So these are some of the examples of the coffee varieties. The first one, which is Typica, this is considered the original variety explored in Dutchland, back in Dutchland. The Bourbon is a natural maturation of Typica and has a high yield and sweeter. This is also another type or another variety of Arabica coffee. Mundo Novo is basically a hybrid between Typica and Bourbon, named after the place in Brazil. S795 developed in India and in Indonesia as well. Picas also, it's a natural maturation discovered in El Salvador at 1959 by the Picas family. While the last one, which is Villa Sarchi, named after the town in Costa Rica where it is discovered.
Sorry, Chef. Yes, before you go on, I just want to remind our attendees that they are, if they have any question for you throughout the session, they can add it to the box, and we will be taking several questions in between questions or in between topics. Whether it is something relating to whatever Chef Yusuf is explaining, or if it's something that you have in mind about coffee or about the topic of today in general. Yes, Chef, please go on.
Thank you so much. So, going back to the Arabica coffee bean, Arabica makes up around 70% of the world trade. The taste of Arabica coffee beans tend to have a sweeter, softer taste with tons of sugar. That's why most of the coffee lovers or coffee drinkers, basically they recommend this type of coffee bean because it has a sweeter, soft taste with also a sugar hint. So fruit are more pleasing aromatics. It has also higher acidity than Robusta. So the Arabica has more acidity if you want to compare it to the Robusta species as well. The growing conditions for Arabica coffee beans is basically they grow at a high altitudes. Higher altitudes grown beans basically mature more slowly due to the adverse conditions in the mountains. So this slower growth beans are denser and richer in flavor. So because they take a long time in order to develop or to be planted, this basically will reflect on the richness of the flavor. The price for the Arabica coffee beans, the Arabica coffee beans, they yield less. This leads to higher production costs as well. So because they are, I don't want to say they are very rare, but they yield less amount of coffee beans. So that's why they are more expensive than Robusta. Now Robusta, as I said, also make up around 30% of the world trade. The taste of the Robusta relatively stronger, harsher taste with a grain-like overtone and peanut aftertaste. So they have a completely different tasting profile, or let's say flavor profile, if you want to compare Arabica to Robusta as well. It contains nearly twice the caffeine of Arabica beans. So you have to be very careful and aware if you want to drink a coffee bean that the amount of caffeine or content or the caffeine content in the Robusta are considered somehow higher than the Arabica coffee beans. Growing conditions, Robusta beans are easier to grow. They can grow at lower altitudes than Arabica. In the coming slides, we will show or will demonstrate the altitude and the impact of the altitude on the flavor profile of the coffee beans. So they
Sorry, Chef, to interrupt. Before we get into that, I just want to ask some specific questions about some of the topics you've mentioned now. You've mentioned the difference between both types of coffee beans. Does that have a direct effect to the flavor profiles of the end product of a coffee cup? Can you please elaborate more on flavor profiles in specific?
Yes, sure, definitely. It has a great impact actually on the final or the overall drink. So if you recommend or if you like your coffee drink to be more sweet with a fruity flavor, you will definitely go for the Arabica coffee beans. And if you like your coffee drink at the end to be more stronger and has an aftertaste, for example, let's say, you will definitely go for the Robusta coffee beans. So it is very important before you select your coffee bean, or before you select your beverage, is basically to ask the one who's drinking or who's making the coffee drink actually, whether the beans you are using are Arabica or Robusta, the altitude of the coffee beans, the way how the beans were processed, and we'll definitely demonstrate this into details regarding the process of the coffee beans. This process has definitely a great impact on the overall final taste. So going back to the topic, so they are less vulnerable to pests and diseases. So they yield more crop per tree. So if you want, so as well, they yield more crops per tree comparing to the Arabica. The price for the Robusta coffee beans, as it is easier to grow and natural gives a higher yield, the production cost definitely will be lower. So the production cost will be definitely lower, and after all the final beverage, the final drink made of Robusta coffee beans will be definitely less in cost if you want to compare it to Arabica. Now the bean belt. Now the bean belt. As you can see in the slide, we will discuss the most popular or the most countries with the high exporting amounts of the coffee beans. You can see the Brazil, Sumatra, Honduras, Peru, and I have already chose some of the countries in order to discuss the flavor or the taste profile of each country. Definitely you will see if you want to go on to any coffee places, the ready packed coffee beans, you have to read the instructions, or you have to read basically the details of the coffee beans, the origin, where they are coming from, the altitude, the taste profile, the date when were the coffee beans roasted, and all of this information, they definitely play a big role in the overall final product. So the first country is Brazil. Brazil has been the world's largest producer of coffee for more than 150 years. So Brazil is the top coffee producer around the world. Brazil grows around one third of the world's coffee. Will This profile for the Brazilian coffee beans tend to be low in acidity, heavy in body, heavy in sweet, and often with a chocolate or nutty flavor. So if you like your drink to be low in acidic, heavy in body, and more sweet as well, with the chocolate and nutty flavor or notes, you will definitely go for the Brazilian coffee beans. The second country, which is Honduras. Honduras also considered the largest producers of coffee beans in the Central America. The oldest record dated back into 1804. The high rainfall often makes it difficult to dry the coffee beans after processing. We'll definitely discuss later on the the three methods of processing the coffee beans, and we'll know why the coffee beans are harder to dry and what is the impact of drying the coffee beans on the overall drink. So some producers use a combination of sun drying and mechanical drying. The taste profile for the Honduras coffee beans are complex fruity quality and lively juicy acidity. Coming to Peru, Peru coffee was first brought to Peru between 1740 and 1760, although the climate was suited to a large-scale coffee production. Taste profile sweet and relatively heavy-bodied, distinctive and juicier as well. The Guatemala coffee beans. Coffee first was introduced around 1750. Coffee became an important crop after 1856. The taste profile for the Guatemala coffee beans, a wide range of flavors are present, from lighter to very sweet, fruity and complex as well, and heavy, rich, and more chocolatey flavor. Heavy, rich, and more chocolatey flavor. Next one is Colombia. Colombia is also a very famous country and very popular country for exporting coffee beans around the world. So coffee probably first introduced in 1723. By 1912, coffee made up approximately of 50% of Colombia's total exports. So by 1912, the coffee exports made approximately of 50% of Colombia. The taste profile also for Colombian coffee beans, they have a huge range of flavors, vary from heavier chocolatier coffees throughout to going to jammy, sweet, and fruity flavor. Jammy comes from the jam. So they have a jammy, sweet, and fruity flavor as well. Last country, which is Ethiopia, the exclusively floral and fruity coffees from Ethiopia have opened many professionals' eyes to the diversity of flavor that coffee can have. The taste profile for the Ethiopian coffee beans are basically noticeably diverse from citrus, often bergamot, and floral, through to candied fruity or even tropical fruit flavors. I have tried to include the most of the highest exporter for the coffee beans in the world. However, they are not the only coffee exporters on the world.
If I may ask, Chef, what is your favorite kind of coffee out of all those origins?
My favorite coffee for sure it will be the Brazilian one. To be honest, as I mentioned, oh, you will definitely see later on that I do prefer the sweet and the chocolatey and fruity flavor as well of the coffee beans. And I don't like, for my opinion, I don't like the acidic coffee flavor or the coffee acidic coffee drinks. So I prefer the sweet fruity ones instead.
Wonderful, Chef. As you can see, I am enjoying a cup of the Colombian coffee myself. I usually uh, don't drink and work at the same time, but it feels appropriate with the topic of this webinar. I just want to remind the attendees once again that you can ask questions, leave questions for Chef Youssef in the questions box, and we will be happy to answer them and go through them. I have a question, Chef. I believe next you are going to dig deep into the process of harvesting the coffee and uh, basically the steps of it, of preparing a coffee cup from harvest until it comes in its popular liquid form. Um, Before we dive into that, I have can you please? I have a question. When we are speaking about coffee in general, the first thing we go to is the Western form of coffee, or what is known as the American coffee, filtered coffee. And coffee, in at the same time, plays a major role in hospitality in the Middle East as well. I believe my question is, of course, your knowledge and your passion towards coffee started, as you mentioned, during your journey at the Culinary Academy, where it was part of your studies and it was introduced to you as a material. And at Zadek, do you have such a material for the students to introduce them to the world of being a barista, for an example, as a second option to being a chef? And if so, is it specific to a certain type of coffee, or is it the science behind preparing coffee?
All right, thank you so much for the question. We definitely have a we definitely teach students about the coffee, especially in the Saudi cuisine. We do have a good material regarding the coffee in the Saudi cuisine covered in the classes as well. I tried to include some of the information about the Saudi coffee in the coming slides. This is also covered in the curriculum for the students here at Zadek. Now,
Yes, sure. Thank you.
thank you so much. So going back to our presentation, basically, we are going now to discuss the harvesting stage. Harvesting stage is very important because this is the first stage after planting for sure the coffee beans. This is the first stage to the journey of the coffee drink. So the greatest challenge for the harvesters basically is the topography of the land where the coffee plants is growing. So great coffee requires a higher altitude, as mentioned before, and many coffee farms are located steep slopes in the mountain area or mountainous area. There are three ways for harvesting coffee, and we'll review them in the coming slides for sure. The first harvesting coffee method is basically the machine harvesting or the mechanical harvesting. What is the mechanical harvesting and what are the characteristics of this harvesting method? So the machines is basically, what do? Is basically they shake the trees of the coffee beans until the fruit of the coffee beans falls down on the land. The disadvantages of this machine or this method of harvesting the coffee beans is basically that the machine does not differentiate between the ripened fruits and the unripened fruits. So basically, you will end up by having a mix of raw coffee beans, let's say, yellowish coffee beans and red coffee beans. So which needs after or later afterwards to be sorted out. The cherries on the branch, basically, what is interesting about the coffee that the cherries of the fruit, basically on the branch itself, they ripen at different stages. So you might find in one branch that a few coffee beans are matured and ripened. However, the remaining fruits or the remaining berries are not yet mature or not yet ripened at the final stage. So, as I mentioned, each branch has a mix of both ripened and raw coffee beans. The machines, as I mentioned, does not differentiate. So whenever they shake the branches or the coffee beans, they all fall down on the land. This means that the cherry must be stored or sorted out later on. These are the advantages, and the advantages for sure definitely will be the process or the speed of collecting these coffee beans. The second method, which is the strip picking. The strip picking is basically the second method of the collecting or harvesting the coffee beans. It is basically a great deal that the coffee is harvested by hand. How when the machines cannot harvest in the hilly areas, or as I said, in the mountainous areas, on the steep slope areas. It is considered also one of the fastest methods, faster than the last method, which is the hand picking for sure. And it pick all cherries of the branch together also with one movement, as you can see in the picture already displayed in front of you. So it is half man-powered and half mechanically powered as well. The This method is basically, it is quick. However, at the end of the day, it's imprecise. So you will get also, as I mentioned, a mix of ripe, half matured, and raw coffee beans as well. And it does not require an expensive equipments or a flat land. This is considered an advantage of strip picking as well. And the last thing, which is the results also still ending up of a bag of mixed ripe fruits or ripe cherries and unripe cherries, which must be again sorted at the end or afterwards. The last one, which is the hand picking or the manual picking of the old method, let's say, this is basically considered the most effective method among the rest. Why it's most effective, basically, because you can see and you can select the fruits you are basically picking by hand. So it does not require later sorting out the fruits, because the fruits you already sorted out, or chosen or selected by hands. Where, as I mentioned, the pickers, they only select the matured coffee beans and they leave the green ones already on the branch to be ripened later on, or to be picked or selected later on at different stage. The advantages, or let's say the disadvantages of this method is basically a labor intensive, where all the pickers have to be paid by the amount of the fruit or the coffee beans that they already pick at the end of the day. So these are the three methods of harvesting the coffee beans: the mechanical one or the machine one, strip picking, and the hand picking.
Thank you, Chef. Before we move on to processing, We have a couple of questions from our attendees. So the first question is a question from Abdullah Al-Siraid. She's asking how to find NO-GMO coffee and can we farm coffee in our climate? I believe he means in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. How to find no-GMO coffee and can we farm it in the Kingdom's climate?
Yeah, sure. Saudi Arabia is basically recently adopting the sustainable coffee planting or harvesting practices, in which they are all GMOs free for sure. And I will definitely tackle this part of our in the presentation today. We in Saudi Arabia, yes, they do have a different coffee species or coffee plants, and we will discuss the location of the where they are already planted and the different of the flavor profile of the Saudi coffee beans as well. This is a very good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chef. We have a second question. It is a question from Ibrahim Hadi. It is what are the main factors that affects the hints that we see in coffee beans? Sometimes we see coffee that has hints of raspberry or has some woody hints. What are the main factors that play a role in that, in determining the specific flavor or the specific hint of flavor we see?
All right, this is basically a great question. I would like to thank Ibrahim for asking the question. The hints is basically referred back to the altitude. To the altitude, this is the first and the most important factor, basically, which definitely plays a big part in the flavor profile of the coffee bean. So it's the altitude, it is the harvesting method, it is the roasting method, it is the processing and the grind size of the coffee bean, and for sure the way how the coffee is basically prepared. But the main purpose or the main factor that plays a big part for the coffee profile is basically where the coffee beans are planted, as we have already as we have already discussed in the previous slides. We have already saw that different countries they have different flavor profiles. So the origin of the coffee beans and for sure the climate of the coffee beans. This is the key factor of the coffee profile.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chef.
All right. Going back to the presentation, we have already discussed the origins. We have already discussed the species of the coffee beans. We have discussed also the methods of harvesting. Now the processing stage, which comes definitely after harvesting, sorting, and we will discuss the processing. Now, how coffee is processed after harvest can have a dramatic effect on the resulting cup. So again, this is another answer for the question which has been already asked by Mr. Ibrahim. So the process of the coffee beans definitely play also a big part and impact of the coffee flavor or the coffee profile at the end. The processing, what they mean by processing is basically this stage which comes after harvesting and before the roasting Processing after harvesting, the coffee cherries are taken to a wet mill to separate basically the beans from the flesh. So basically the main part or the main idea or the main purpose of this process is basically to separate the beans from the flesh and to dry into the 60% so they can or they are safe to be stored. Coffee beans starts with the moisture content around 60% and they should be dried to around 11 to 12%. Moisture is one of the factors that attracts mold basically. So that's why the drying process has to take place right in here. So the contents of the moisture content is around 60%, as we mentioned or discussed. So it has to be dried until to reach 11 to 12% to ensure that they do not rot while waiting to be sold and shipped as well. We have also three processes or the three methods for processing. The first one, which is the natural process, which is also called the dry process. The second one, which is the hybrid process, and also it's called the bulk process. And the last one, which is the washed process. After finishing with the slides, you will start thinking when you go for next time to ask for a cup of coffee, you will definitely ask the roaster or will ask the one who is preparing the coffee that what is the process of this coffee beans? Is it natural? Is it washed? And you will be amazed and surprised by the amount of the impact of this process basically on the final product. So the first one is basically the natural process and so called the dry process. Why it's called dry process? Basically because after the coffee beans have been processed and separated, they basically lay them down on the floor in order to dry them out. So as you can see, the stages starting from picking the unripe cherries removed. After that, the drying, as you can see in the picture, that the cherry beans are already laid on the floor in order to be dried out by the sun. So after drying again as well, there will be resting from 30 to 60 days. After resting, which is basically hulling, which is removing the silver skin, which is a very thin layer, as you, if you can remember the one which is mentioned in the first slides. After hulling, the grading, they grade and they sort out the coffee beans, and after that, the roasting stage comes on. So the natural process, as I mentioned, it's called also a dry process. This is the oldest method of processing coffee after harvesting. The coffee cherries, basically, as I mentioned, they are spread out. The coffee cherries are spread out in order to dry out on the sun, which allows an air or a better airflow for the cherries to, which resulting in a more even drying. So by this method, basically the cherries must be turned regularly. The cherries must be turned regularly in order to expose all of the coffee surfaces, all of the coffee bean to the sun, which helps definitely to dry out the coffee beans faster in order to prevent having or ending up with the mold on the coffee beans. Uh, as I mentioned, the husk is removed at the hulling stage. And the natural process, the advantages of the natural process to the coffee is basically sometimes positive, but often quite unpleasant. So it is most often pleasant. However, sometimes it is quite unpleasant if you are processing the coffee beans using this method. The second method, which is the hybrid, the second method, which is the hybrid, or the called also the pulp process. As you can see, it goes from the unripe cherry removed, pulping stage, drying stage, resting stage, hulling stage, grading, and roasting at the end. Why it's called hybrid? It's basically a blend or a mix of both the dry process and the washed process, the dry process and the washed process. This process is mainly used in Brazil. So the hybrid process is mainly used in Brazil. The idea of washed process is basically that with a high cup of quality using less water than the washed process. So here the sustainability factor plays a big part. So it does not require the amount of water that it is used in the wash process. It is basically a mix in between dry and the wash process. So by using this method, you will basically notice the increase of sweetness and body of the coffee, and it's not the same of the dry process. Last thing, the mucilage, which is the very thin that we call the honey layer, or that coats the coffee beans, is basically and dries in the sun afterwards. So after they have already washed the beans, they will definitely dry them out at the later stage or afterwards. The last method or the last process is called the wash process, which I believe we all like. I personally, I don't prefer the natural process because the natural process has more of an acidic flavor. However, the wash process, the overall the flavor profile will become more sweet and fruity as well. So the stages or the flow goes from the unripe cherries removed, pulping, fermentation, washing the beans, drying the beans after resting the beans, hulling, grading, and roasting. These are the stages that the coffee bean goes from, starting from removing or separating the coffee beans, reaching to the roasting stage. Now, the wash process, the goal of basically the wash process and why washing is taking a place right in here is to remove the sticky flesh from the coffee seeds before it's dried. So the main purpose of washing the coffee beans is basically to remove the sticky, which is called the mucilage, the sticky layer of the coffee beans before it is dried. So the process is basically much more expensive than the others, considering the amount of water that is used for this process, and definitely that water which is used for washing the beans will definitely be discarded and cannot be recycled afterwards. So the sustainable factor or the sustainability factor in the washing process does play a big part in this method. If you want to go more sustainable, you will definitely choose the first one, which is the dry method. But you have to keep in consideration the flavor profile after all. Now, the coffee is being removed, as I mentioned, to a clean tank, as I will show in the coming slide, which is this one. You will see that this is a clean tank. This is a clean tank for the wash process. This is a clean tank for the wash process, where the fermentation will take place as well. Why fermentation? In order to be able to remove the outer layer afterwards in the drying stage. Now the fruit flesh basically contains a lot of pectin and it is firmly attached. But the fermentation, which takes place right in this stage or at this stage, basically breaks down the remaining flesh. One of the disadvantages for this method is basically that this method, as I mentioned, it requires a huge amount of water. It requires a huge amount of water. So take into consideration that the countries, they plant already the coffee beans and they harvest, they will definitely, if they do have a good amount of water sources, they will definitely go for the wash process. If they are suffering from the water amount in their countries, they will definitely go for the dry process. So the disadvantages, as I mentioned, are definitely the amount of water consumption. Also, the amount of time that fermentation takes depends on the different factors or different several factors. The first one including the altitude. So the higher the altitude, the higher time or the more time it takes for the fermentation process. And also temperature plays a big part or big factor for the process that takes place. So the more temperature, the higher the temperature, the faster the process will take place. So this chart is basically, or this picture shows exactly the process of the stages. This one is for the natural dry process. As you can see, is basically separating, drying. This one is the hulling. After that, they're separating the husk, going all the way to being packed, the pulp or natural process, and the last one, which is the wash process. As I mentioned, this is the where the fermentation process takes place. This is the first stage of washing, and after that will definitely be dried into the sun, goes all the way to the hulling process, sorting, and for sure packaging.
Thank you, Chef. I have a question uh, regarding the washed beans part. Does it differ in color? Like, can you tell what kind of processing the coffee bean went to uh, by looking at the color of the coffee beans or the end products before roasting? Because sometimes you see I personally, as I mentioned, I'm a coffee enthusiast, so I always like to look at coffee being roasted and watch different types of videos online. So I noticed that uh, sometimes the coffee bean before roasting, it is almost completely white, and then sometimes it's kind of light brown. Is that due to the difference of the processing method used for each harvest?
All right, thank you so much for the question. It is basically the roasting stage. that comes after the process. The process, it does play a factor for the color of the coffee beans. However, if you do not have an experience in the roasting or as a roaster for the coffee beans, you will definitely have difficulties and say that this has been already washed or unwashed or in which method has been used. So the color is basically reflecting the roasting stages. In the coming slides,
Mm.
I will already show the stages of the roasting, and you will definitely see the difference between each stage of the roasting. So
Yes.
some people they prefer light roast, some prefer medium roast, and some they already prefer a dark roast, for example.
Yes, chef. I'm sorry. Actually, I mean before roasting. So when they open the coffee bean bag and place it in the roaster, so before it is roasted, does it differ? Like, does the processing method differ to what happens to the bean after it's washed and dried, or if it's not washed at all?
All right, I get you. يعني I can say as an coffee expert, you will definitely not notice that يعني that much difference in the color of the coffee beans before roasting, definitely, because they will all tend to be green. Some of them they will be lighter green, some of them will be darker green for sure. But definitely the washed process of the washed beans will definitely have a lighter color because the outer layer, which is the mucilage, has not been removed at this stage. So the washed ones will definitely have a lighter color for sure.
Thank you, chef.
Thank you so much. Now, coming to the sizing and grading for the coffee beans as well. Coffee has been graded in many countries by the size longer than been graded by the country or by the quality. So it's basically now graded by the size more than it's graded by the quality of the beans. Different countries, they are using different terminologies for the coffee grading. In this slide, I would like to emphasize and to highlight that in different countries, they use different terminologies. For example, you can say in Colombia, Supremo and Excelso are very common grades. Excelso is a screen sizes of 14 to 60 and smaller than Supremo, for example. In Central America, larger sizes are traditionally referred as a superior and also emphasizing that the quality through the size. Bee berries are also known as charcoal. In Africa, the largest screen size is generally considered AA grade. Then they have already an AB and then A. So the sizes are different. The size of the coffee bean itself, the coffee seed or the coffee bean itself, the naming differs between country and another. Now the density and the grind size, and I have tried to make it clear and visible for the audience as well to see the difference. However, يعني, in order to see it by yourself, you need to watch it in front of you in reality, not on the screen. However, I will do my best to make it clear for sure. So, what is difficult usually for the baristas is to communicate the size. Is definitely to communicate the size. Therefore, the grinders or the equipments of the grinders we have nowadays, they all have different settings. They all have different settings. And if I, for example, choose one of the grinders and I set the grind to be 5, that does not mean that the on another device or another grinder, 5 will get the same size of the first one. So that's why you need to do calibration. Whenever you are using a new grinder, you need to do calibration, which is you need to test the grind size for your drink. So we have fine, medium, and coarse. Very fine, medium, and coarse. Now we will discuss the roasting stage. So already harvesting, after harvesting, again we have sorting out. After sorting out, we do the process. We have already discussed the three process of of the coffee beans, the wet, dry, and the hybrid one. Now the coffee roasting stage or the coffee roasting stage. Now, roasting is one of the most fascinating aspects of the coffee industry for sure. It takes the green coffee seed, which almost has no flavor. So the green coffee seeds is basically almost have no flavor. So what basically develop the flavor is the roasting. So this roasting stage is basically transforms this mild flavor coffee bean into astonishingly complex coffee bean as well. Now the question is, do I have to go fast or slow? Do I have to go light or dark? I will answer this question for sure. Now, the coffee roasting picture, as you can see, we have almost 10 stages of roasting the coffee beans, starting all the way from the raw coffee bean, reaching to the developed ones. So if you can notice that the difference in color is not really much, if you are not experienced in roasting coffee beans, you might not see the difference between each stage. However, this will definitely becomes by practice, by experience, in order to differentiate between each stage. And you, as a roaster, you need to know when to stop basically roasting your coffee beans. You want it to be, let's say, reaches the first crack stage or the developed stage or the development stage as well. So it depends on the coffee beans and it depends also on the beverage you are preparing afterwards or the basically the likes that they how people they like their drinks to be prepared. Do they want it to be more acidic? Do they want it to be mildly acidic, more sweet, less sweet, and the notes or the hints of the coffee flavor or the coffee drink at the end. Now, coming back to my question, do I have to go fast or slow, light or dark? This is basically a different chemical reaction occur during roasting. That's why I mentioned it starts from the green plant, which almost has a no flavor, going all the way to the developed flavor. So during the roasting stage, the coffee bean reduce the weight of the coffee during the roasting stage, basically because you are extracting the coffee beans to heat, which definitely will dry out and will have a less weight of the coffee beans. Now, because of the also evaporation of the moisture, that's why the coffee beans become less in weight. Roasting stages or coffee roasting stages, we have 5 stages. We'll see in the coming slides the 5 stages. I will definitely review in the coming slide the 5 stages. The first stage, which is drying. The drying our raw coffee beans contains at this stage, as we mentioned, 7 to 11% water by weight. The coffee won't brown in the presence of water. So that's why it is very important. It is very essential to dry out the coffee beans before the roasting stage. Because if the coffee bean was not really dried before the roasting stage, this will definitely affect on the flavor profile of the coffee bean. So coffee won't turn brown, as I mentioned, in the presence of water, and it takes some time for the beans to absorb sufficient heat to start evaporating the water. So at this stage, it takes time for the coffee beans to be properly dehydrated out for the water or the moisture content to be evaporated out of the coffee seeds. As we can see in the picture, that the coffee beans are already laid down and to be dried in the sun. The second stage, which is yellowing. The second stage, which is yellowing. Once the water has been already driven out of the beans, the first browning reaction can begin. So once the beans already are drying out, or the moisture of the beans driven out, the second stage of the roasting is basically the yellowing. So here, where the browning reaction already begun, at this stage, the coffee beans are still very dense and have an aroma of basmati rice and a little of breadness. So at this stage, the beans have already the smell or the aroma of the basmati rice, the raw basmati rice. I'm pretty sure that all
It seems Chef Yusuf has lost connection. He is reconnecting right now and he will join us back shortly.
All right. So
Welcome back, Chef.
I apologize. So coming back to the second stage, which is yellowing, as I mentioned, the coffee will taste unpleasant at this stage with a combination of bitterness from the outside and the sour and grassy flavor coming from the undeveloped inside. So I'm pretty sure that none of you is really interested in trying this or the coffee at this stage. As I said, it has an unpleasant flavor. So coming to the third stage, which is the first crack, the first stage, which is called the first crack. Once the browning reaction after the yellow stage, it
Excuse
begins.
me, Chef. My apologies. If you can reshare the presentation because I believe it stopped sharing.
Yes, yes, sure. I apologize.
No problem.
How about now?
Um, yes, it is back on.
So at this stage, which is the first crack, as I mentioned, after the yellowing stage, it began to gather speed. There buildup of gases also as well. Why? Or this is the explanation of why crack basically happens or occurring. It's basically because of the carbon dioxide and the water vapor inside the bean. Once the pressure gets too great, the bean will definitely break down and open. So that's why it's called a first crack. From this point onwards, the familiar coffee flavor or the familiar coffee flavor will start to develop. The first or the stage four, which is the stage before the last stage, is basically the roast development. At this stage, the roast determines the end color of the beans and for sure the roast degree. So, as a professional roaster, you will definitely have to know, or you definitely get to know when to stop roasting at this stage, which is the roast development. This stage recognize or select or basically reflects the flavor of the after all flavor of the coffee beans. Here are the roaster can determine the balance of acidity and bitterness in the end product. So at this stage, we'll definitely determine the balance of acidity and bitterness of the end product. Coming all the way to the last stage, which is coffee roasting, which is the second crack. Here beans began to crack again, but with a quieter and snappier sound. So the first crack will have a louder sound than this stage. Once we reach the second crack, the oil will be driven out to the surface of the coffee bean. So at this stage, after the first crack and the development comes the second crack, the oils will be driven to the surface of the coffee bean. Much of the acidity will have been lost, and for sure, a new kind of flavor is developed. So these are the stages, as I mentioned. The first one, which is drying, after drying, yellowing, first crack, roast development, and the second crack. In this chart, also this table, you can see the difference between the light roasting, medium roasting, and dark roasting, and the impact on the color, acidity, flavor, and caffeine. So the light roasting, the color will be blonde. For the medium roasting, will be light brown, and for the dark roasting, will be for sure a dark brown color. If we want to discuss the acidity, for sure, the light roasted coffee beans has an high acidic. However, the medium roasting has a balanced acidity, and the dark roasting, you can somehow tell that there's no acidity in the drink. The flavor for the light roasting will be for sure fruity. For the medium roasting will be sweet, and for dark roasting it will be bitter. That's why some people they prefer their drink to have a mix or a blend of medium roasting and dark roasting, so they have the characteristics of both drinks, or for both roasting stages. The last one, which is the caffeine. If you are someone who is really considering the caffeine in his drinks or in her drinks, for sure, the light roasting has a high caffeine content compared to the medium and dark roasting. And the dark roasting, for sure, has the lowest amount of caffeine. Coming back onto the elevation factor, I believe this was highlighted by in one of the questions that have been asked throughout the webinar. The impact of the elevation factor on the coffee beans. As you can see, the highest elevation, the flavor profile will be fruity, complex, acidic, and floral as well. At the elevation of 1,200 meters, it will be nutty, has a cacao flavor, vanilla, citrus, and earthy flavor as well. The medium altitude, around 950 meters, has a smooth, sweet flavor, and the low altitude, such as in Hawaii or Hawaiian Kona, it has a mild, subtle salt and uncomplicated flavor. So the higher altitude, the difference or the different flavor profile. The countries who has already a higher altitude of coffee beans, Colombia the first one, Ethiopia, Guatemala, Kenya, Papua New Guinea as well, Sulawesi, and the high altitude Costa Rica, and Nicaragua, Mexico, and Sumatra as well. For the medium altitude, we have Brazil, Burma, and Santos. For the low altitude, we have also the Hawaiian Kona. So, as I mentioned on the cover, on the packaging of the coffee beans, you definitely need to understand what are the information written on the bag. So the elevation plays a big factor or a big part on the flavor or the taste profile of the coffee beans. So if you like fruity, complex flavors, you will definitely go for the higher altitude and so on. If you don't want to have that flavor, if you want to have it such as mild or subtle soft flavor, you will go for the lowest altitude.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you. I have a question. Now, is it possible to, or let me rephrase it in a more uh, direct way? As you mentioned earlier, the sources of the coffee beans itself can vary depending on the bean belt. Now, in a country like Saudi Arabia, where we have so many coffee houses and coffee specialty houses, most of the time it says that the roasting is done in Saudi Arabia, but the bean itself is either Brazilian, Colombian, or from Honduras, as you mentioned. What is the process when you think about like how does that come to be? Is it that the coffee beans are exported and then they are roasted locally, or is there something else as a coffee expert that you can add to that?
All right, thank you for the question. It's basically, as you said, the source of the coffee beans plays a big part. Most of the beans now in Saudi Arabia, they are imported from outside. However, we'll discuss in the coming slides that there is already some high quality coffee beans are being already harvested in the kingdom, such as the Jizan Mountains, and they definitely have their distinctive flavor. That's why some of the coffee houses you might see, they go for the local sustainable products instead of having the beans already coming from outside. So the roasting stage has to be done inside the kingdom or right before the coffee drinks are already prepared. And as I mentioned, yes, it does differ the source or the origin of the coffee beans on the overall final product. So if you have the local beans and they are then already roasted inside, they will definitely have a different taste and a different aromas. If you are exporting or importing the coffee beans from outside of the country and you are or doing the roasting stage inside the country, will definitely have a different profile or different characteristics. You need to try both. You need to do experiment on both in order to be able to differentiate, in order to be able to recognize the differences, basically. It does take a long time. It does take a long time and definitely to 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 tell the differences in the flavor at the end of the day. It is not an easy job. It's not definitely an easy job. It took me around 3 to 4 years after experimentation after working with different coffee beans from all around the world, including as well the beans which is already been here in the kingdom. So it is definitely it's a long way for you in order to differentiate or to distinguish between each coffee beans.
Thank you for that, Chef. So it has to do with the freshness when the bean is roasted locally.
Yes, definitely for sure. The more fresh the roasting stage is, the better the flavor of the drink at the end of the day. That's why one of the information of the data that has to be put on the packaging for sure is the roasting date. Is the roasting date. I have already mentioned this in the coming slides that the maximum let's say the maximum duration for the roasting, it has to be by 2 weeks or less. So after 2 weeks, the aroma of the flavor of the coffee beans will basically start to deteriorate afterwards. So the more fresh or the earliest, the better for the coffee beans for sure.
Wonderful, Chef. Thank you. The more we go on with the session, the more I'm appreciating the cup of coffee I'm enjoying right now. Thank you, Chef.
Thank you so much. Now, going back to the presentation as well, now the grinding coffee. This is also very important. This is also a very important stage in the coffee beverage of the coffee that we have already nowadays. The smell of freshly ground coffee is evocative, heady, and definitely indescribable. Grinding coffee, the aim basically is to get this coffee beans ready for brewing afterwards, and for sure to expose the coffee beans to a large surface in order to extract more flavor locked inside the beans. So definitely the grinding also plays a big part of the flavor at the end of the day. The size of the coffee ground changes the speed at which the coffee brews. As I mentioned, we have already four stages of the grinding of the coffee beans: the soft, the super, the soft one, the coarse one, and definitely the stages that we have already viewed before. It is very important that we try to make all the pieces look the same or have the same size when grinding the coffee. And why it is important to have all the pieces having the same size of the coffee? As I mentioned, the main purpose or the main function of this process is basically is to get the beans ready for brewing. What would happen if you have a mix of coarse coffee beans or coarse coffee and a fine coffee? The coarse one takes longer time to brew. However, the smaller ones or the finer ones will brew faster. So at the end, you will end up with a mix or a blend of a flavor in one cup. So the coarser one will be having an acidic, a bitter flavor, while the finer one definitely will be sweet. So you need to have a uniform size of the coffee beans after grinding. Finally, grinding the coffee exposes more of it to the air, which means the coffee will go more stale quickly. So it should be ideally only be ground just before brewing. It is very important then to grind the coffee beans right before you are prepare or you prepare the drink. You will never see a professional coffee house. They have already a ground coffee before they prepare your drink. Well, I'm pretty sure that all of you have already seen these two equipments or these two devices in all coffee houses and all baristas. This is basically the coffee grinder equipment. This is basically a coffee grinding equipment, and most of them they are already equipped with the scale. Also, scaling the ground coffee is also a very important, and it depends on the drink or the beverage you are preparing afterwards. Now, I wanted to highlight the two equipments or the two machines or the two devices that are used for grinding the coffee beans. The first one, which is Whirly blade grinder. This is basically a metal blade spins and smashes the coffee into pieces. One of the disadvantages of this grinder is basically you will end up with having uneven cut size, and for sure some pieces will brew faster, which makes the coffee bitter. The large pieces add also an unpleasant sourness. So one of the disadvantages is to have an uneven cut size, as I mentioned, and as I emphasized, that to have a uniform size of coffee is definitely a very important aspect in this profession. So the second one, which is the burr grinder, this is common available as an electric models. The advantages of this grinder is basically they have a two cutting discs. You can adjust the distance between them and change the size of the grounds. So that's why they're sitting in this machine or in this device, where you can control the coarse or the size of the coffee beans, which definitely results grounds are very fine and even in size, which even this is a key factor. هلا, you decide whether you want the grinds to be fine or coarse, but the key factor in this device is basically which is to have a even uniform size grinds. Ideal for brewing for sure a great coffee. Now, in the coming slide, we'll review some of the most common coffee drinks or coffee makers. In the coming slides, we'll review the most common and used coffee makers. I am personally using a French press, and I have also a drip machine at home. I used to make my coffee using different coffee makers, but I have recently focusing on the French press and the drip coffee machine. Now, the types of coffee makers. The first one, which is the French press. This is basically we will review the stages or the steps of making a coffee using the French press. It is basically probably the most underrated method. It is cheap, easy, repeatable, and just about everyone has at home. So it is accessible. It is cheap. It's not expensive. If you are a coffee drinker and you love coffee, and you want to make your coffee at home, or by your own, you will definitely choose this one, which is the French press. The steps for preparing a coffee drink using the French press is basically the first thing is you need to grind the coffee just before you start brewing. And I will definitely highlight this in each coffee makers, which is the grinding the coffee fresh. Second thing, which is boiling a kettle of fresh water for sure, putting the ground coffee in the French press and place it on a scale. As you can see already, the French press is placed on the scale. Now you have to pour a correct amount of water on the scale or in the French press. Afterwards, you need to leave the coffee to steep for 4 minutes. During this time, the coffee will float to the top to form a crust-like layer, as you can see in the picture next. This is the crust of the layer that will definitely form after steeping for 4 minutes. Now, after 4 minutes, take a large spoon and remove the crust. After that, spoon the scoop them and definitely discard them. Wait for another 5 minutes. Now the drink, because the drink is basically too hot. The brewing temperature for the water is around 90 to 95, so definitely the drink will be extremely hot at this stage. After that, you can pour the coffee slowly through the mesh inside the coffee or inside the French press device. And after that, allow the coffee to cool in the cup a little and then enjoy. The second one, which is pour over or filter brewers. This is also a very common method of making your coffee drinks. The common factor here is the key to brew is percolation, which means that the water passes through a bed of coffee. It's basically by using this filter brewers that the coffee or the water passes through a bed of coffee to extract the flavor. The key principle for using this coffee makers is three, or are three. The first one is the grind of the coffee. The second one, which is the contact time, and the third one, which is the amount of coffee. To be honest, before I start exploring and digging deep in this profession, I was looking at the bartender and I just saying, why he is scaling everything from the scratch, why he is putting or adjusting the timer. But then after I have already joined him and after I have studied and explored more about barista and coffee profession, I'm definitely now respecting every single thing that they used to do, which is definitely changes the whole flavor profile of the coffee drink at the end. So going back to the session, the key principle is basically the first one, which is the grind of the coffee. The finer the coffee, the more is extracted from it is as the water passes through. So the first principle is the size of the coffee beans. The second one, which is the contact time. This is not only how quickly the water flows through the coffee, but also how long it takes us to add the water. So also the time that it takes for us to add the water also is considered one of the key factor or the principles of making a filter brews or the pour over coffee. The third one, which is the amount of coffee, the more coffee there is, the longer the water will make or will take to flow throughout, and the longer the contact time. So the amount of coffee also placed in the filter is considered a principle in here. So the grind of the coffee, the contact time, and the amount of coffee placed inside the filter. Now, how to prepare your drink using a pour over or filter brewers. The size of the coffee bean has to be ground into medium size, which is similar to a caster sugar or the normal sugar we are using at home, which is a caster sugar size. The brewing is you have to have 3 grams or 30 grams, sorry, of coffee and 500 grams of water. So this is the formula or the ratio for the coffee and the water for using this method or this machine. Now the steps, first thing again, you have to grind the coffee just before you start brewing, boiling a kettle of fresh water with a low mineral content, and I will definitely explain why a low mineral content afterwards. Place the paper filter in the brewer and rinse briefly under the hot tub. Add the coffee to the brewer. If you are using a pouring kettle, decant the water into it immediately. Again, using the scale. Scale is one of the most important and essential equipments for the barista, for any barista. Using the scale, also pour a little water on the coffee, about twice as much as the coffee by weight. Slowly pour the remainder of the water on the coffee as well. Let it drip through until the bed of coffee looks dry. So we'll keep pouring on the bed of the coffee until the coffee bed looks dry. After that, discard the coffee and paper. Remove the brewer from the cup, as you can see in this page on this picture. And after that, definitely enjoy the coffee. So this is the second way of preparing your coffee drink. Different kinds of filters. I'm pretty sure that whenever you go to any place in order to buy or to shop for the coffee filters, you will definitely be asked what is the difference between different coffee filters, what is the difference between paper, and what is the difference between cloth, and what to design, what to buy, and what is your decision based on. The first one, which is the metal filters, it is basically only remove the larger pieces of coffee or the ground coffee for sure. This resulting brew will have some silty sediment in it and looks a little cloudy. So if you are using a metal filter, for sure the drink or the final drink will be for sure cloudy. Now, also metal filters can be used for years and the filters are kept clean and washed. So this is one of the advantages for using metal filters is basically they can last for years if they are properly washed and for sure sanitized afterwards. The second filter, which is the cloth. Cloth has been used for a coffee for a very long time. Like paper, it strains out the suspended pieces of coffee, but it does allow some of the oil to come through. I'm pretty sure that most of you have seen the on top of the coffee drink, which is the very top layer of the drink, is greasy. So maybe the coffee house are using the cloth one. So that's why this greasy layer comes out after brewing. So the resulting cup is very clean with a richer, fuller mouthfeel as well. The last one, which is the paper filter, and this is the most used and the most common type of filters, they produce the cleanest cup of coffee. This is also considered disposable, so it's only a single time use or one time use. However, the rest of the coffee filters might be used again, not only one time, not only single use. So they strain out all of the suspended materials as well as the any oils in the brew process. The resulting cup is fairly clear liquid. So the final outcome is a fairly clear liquid. So I believe this is an overview of the coffee filters, which pretty sure that will help you in choosing the filter afterwards whenever you go and shop for yourself. Now coming on to the
Sorry, Chef,
yeah,
to
please.
interrupt. I have a question of my own, and we also received a couple of questions from the attendees. So my question is, and this is purely for personal gains, what is the better ratio to coffee or to water to coffee with the French press if I'm preparing a cup for one?
This is a very good question, actually. You need to add 20 grams of coffee, of ground coffee, for each 100 ml of water. And it also depends at the end of the day for how long you are brewing your coffee, the temperature of the water you are adding, and also to your French press. So some people already they like their French press to be strong, so they add more ground coffee into it, or they add less water to the French press. But the optimal ratio, I would say it's between 18 to 20 to 22 grams for each 100 ml of water. This is the respected ratio, or this is the ratio I am basically following, and the baristas generally they are using. But again, at the end of the day, if you want more intense or more strong coffee flavor, you will definitely add more to the French press.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chef. Let's take a couple of the questions. I believe most of those questions are coming up in the presentation, but we have a question from Ms. Tamara. She asks, what's the process of cold brewing, and is it true that it has more caffeine? Also, is it true that salt balances out the acidic aftertaste of coffee?
All right, thank you. Cold brewing is basically when the brewed coffee or the filtered coffee is basically placed in the chiller overnight or the next day. This is considered the cold brewing. However, I can see nowadays most of the coffee houses they are preparing the cold brew instantly by adding the ice cubes directly into the hot coffee drink. However, the most authentic and the most traditional way of preparing a cold brew is basically by placing this cold coffee or this cold beverage overnight in the chiller at the temperature of 0 to 5 in order to develop more the flavors while it's been sitting already inside the fridge. I believe this is the first part of the question. What is the second part of the question?
The second is she asks, is it true that salt balances out the acidic aftertaste of coffee?
I'm not sure if I understood the question very well. If your question is by adding salt to it, this is something that basically you need to avoid because it might be the coffee beans that you are choosing to make your cold brew drink out of. Definitely, there's a salt content in the coffee beans, and the result of having a better flavor or a better taste for your coffee drink after the cold brewing is basically the roasting stage, the origin of the coffee beans, and the way how the drink is basically been prepared and brewed for you. So it definitely balances the flavor, but from my point of view, or from a barista point of view, adding a salt to your drink is something that really not recommended. So I do recommend to change the coffee beans that you are drinking, dig deeper in the reasons why the coffee is coming out in this way.
Thank you, Shrita, for that. Now, I believe we are moving on to further methods of preparing coffee. If we can kindly skip over that just to make the best use of time and discuss the growth of beans in Saudi Arabia and how that part of the industry is continuously growing in the kingdom.
Yes, definitely, for sure. So one more thing, just before moving on to the beans in the kingdom, I just want to highlight the water that has been used for the coffee drink, and highlighting the last question, which is about the salt content. So the amount of total dissolved solids in your water that has been already used to brew the coffee also plays a big part or a big impact on the final product. So the odor, the color, the calcium hardness, the total alkalinity, the pH level, the sodium level is definitely plays a big part of the final drink. So maybe the coffee beans are has nothing to do with the drink. Maybe the brewing stage is done properly, but the main reason might be is basically the water that is being used in order to prepare this drink. Now, coming all the way to the golden rules for a fresh coffee cup, and I just want to highlight because this question was been asked or has been asked already by you or by one of the audience in the beginning of the webinar. First of all, you need to buy a coffee that has already a clear roast date on the packaging. Try to buy within 2 weeks of roasting, as I already have mentioned before. Buy only enough coffee for a couple of weeks at a time. Don't buy a big bulk of coffee beans, and they will definitely go off order afterwards. Buy whole beans and grind them yourself. The Now the Saudi coffee. Now coming to the Saudi coffee, the overview: it is brought from Ethiopia to Yemen, then moved up to the kingdom, starting at Mecca for sure. When we started growing the beans around 400 years ago in the kingdom, most known product to honor guests. So, as we all know, the first drink or the first beverage drink that you always serve for the guests in order to honor them is basically a Saudi coffee. Is a Saudi coffee. In the kingdom, we grow the beans in three different places. The first one is Al Baha, the second one is Jazan, and the third one is Asir. Saudi coffee beans types, the first one which is Khulani, and the second one is Harari. The Khulani is named after the Khulan bin Amir tribe, distinguished by its oily layer and unique scent, one of the most expensive beans around the world, and they grown in Jazan Mountains, as I mentioned. The second one is Harari, named after Harar city in Ethiopia. Now it's grown in the kingdom. In this slide, we'll see the spices. They are used in different regions in the kingdom. So each region has different flavor and different roasting color as well. The roasting in the roasting stage is in the north is dark, in Najd is blonde, east is blonde, Hijaz is blonde, and the south is light. The spices that they are commonly used in north are cardamom. In Najd, they are using cardamom and cloves. In east, they are using cardamom and saffron. In Hijaz region, they are using cardamom, saffron, and mystic as well. And the south, they might be using cardamom, saffron, cloves, ginger, and cinnamon.
Wonderful stuff. I have a question, please. You mentioned before when we were talking about different types of grinds that there is very fine grinds to fine to medium to more coarse ones. So when we think of Saudi coffee or let's say Arabic coffee, usually if I'm not mistaken, is it fine or very fine? And does it differ simply by the spices, or is there another aspect to it when thinking of the process of coffee? Is there a special roasting for it, or is it treated the same way as the rest of the coffee beans for other types of coffee drinks?
This is another very good question, actually. So the types of the Arabic coffee are basically vary between Arabica and Robusta. Most of them they are Arabica. Some of the coffee houses they prefer to have a blend of both. Some of the coffee houses they prefer to have a blend of both. However, it is they all go through the same process that we have already discussed earlier, from processing, from brewing as well. But what makes it distinctive or has its distinctive flavor is basically the roasting stage, and for sure the grinding size. Coming back to your question, the size of the Arabic coffee is definitely the fine size. And what makes it, let's say, yani, stands out from the different coffee drinks is basically the method of brewing the coffee drink. As we all know, the amount of the coffee added to the water is considered somehow also high, with the spices added in. Plus, the method of preparing the coffee drink is basically here considered or called foaming, not basically boiling. So you mix the grind coffee with the water directly on the stove or on the heat while mixing and not reaching the boiling method. So by reaching this foaming method, you will definitely have the flavor developed. And afterwards, you need to let this coffee rest for a few minutes before drinking it directly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chef. We have a question from Mr. Abdullah. He's asking, how do you invest in coffee? How do you invest in coffee? I believe the business-wise, personal-wise, if you want to make money by going into the coffee industry, how do you invest in coffee?
Yani, from my understanding of this question, I would say for sure selecting the origin of the coffee beans. And it all starts by the origin of the coffee beans for sure. After choosing the origin of the coffee beans, you would definitely need to visit the roaster houses to see the process, how the process goes on in that part. What is your what is your desired roasting stage afterwards? Who are your target market? Also, your target market depends. If you're targeting, for example, elderly people, they do like the dark roasted coffee beans. If you are targeting the youth, let's say, they more go to the medium roasted coffee beans. So you need to understand the market. You need to do research in the market, see exactly what is the market they are offering. Try to be unique. Try to be unique. Try to be selective. Try to have some key factors or something that you are to stand out from the crowd. Definitely is a big part here. Uh, Coffee industry is really vast and growing very rapid nowadays. That's what makes you investing is definitely by selecting the coffee beans, by selecting also the stage of the stage of the roasting, by having experts and our baristas experts in making any coffee drink that can meet the expectation of your customer or the guest for sure.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chef. How do you think, this is a question from me now, how do you think being a chef enriched your coffee knowledge? And do you use this knowledge in your path as a chef and not as a barista? Like, do you benefit from the coffee knowledge in either your teaching or in being a chef generally?
Yes, definitely. What I was really trying, definitely after exploring the barista profession, definitely to understand how every process or every stage of the coffee, starting from planting all the way to the cup, it was really important for me. But what was really more important for me is how to utilize or how to use this information and to reflect it in my profession, which is basically a chef. So understanding the different flavor profiles, understanding the different tastes, the different notes, the sweetness level, and all of these aspects basically uh, plays a big part in my career. So what I have been working on recently is the flavor pairing of the coffee beans or the coffee drinks in cooking, is basically how to utilize this information, how to utilize this knowledge into cooking. So that helped me for sure in crafting menus, developing or the menus based on my knowledge in the coffee or in the barista. For sure, I have came up with the let's say different salad dressings by using this coffee. Uh, one of the key factors was when I used to see the baristas after grinding and after brewing the coffee, they used to discard the coffee beans. So one time, an idea came up to my mind, how we can use this coffee beans or this grind coffee beans, which is discarded directly after. So I took that beans and I started to do my experiments. I have reached to end up with a cupcake using this ground coffee, and you really will be amazed by the flavor of these cupcakes. And when I first served it to a guest, he was really impressed with the outcomes. Also, as well, I am now currently working on preparing salad dressings using coffee, uh, let's say a dust or a garnish for a plate using this of coffee grind as well, and marination for the meat. We usually use the salt and different spices for marinating the meats. However, nowadays I already started marinating or marinating and seasoning the meats by using this ground coffee. So this will definitely have a different flavor at the end of the day.
Thank you for that, Chef. Uh, what is your favorite coffee beverage? We can end the webinar on a personal note, and why, if you don't mind. You already mentioned you prefer to use the French press method at home. So I remember that, but on a more general sense, obviously coffee is a major part of trends all over social media and all over the world. Um, and recently it's been trending that um, a lot of um, a lot of people are more into drinking coffee. It is a part of social outings and social gatherings. So I would love to know what your favorite coffee beverage is.
All right. For the cold drink, is basically my favorite is a Spanish latte. Why Spanish latte? Because it has a balanced flavor of coffee sweetness and for sure the milk flavor as well. So Spanish latte is one of my favorite drinks if it comes to the cold coffee drink. And the second one, which is it's either a hot V60 or the French press as well. So these are my favorite drinks. That's generally, I do drink all drinks بشكل عام generally. So that's it.
Is Spanish latte actually Spanish, Chef?
Is Spanish latte Spanish? It was first created in Spain, exactly, but started to develop from that point. But what makes it distinguished among the other beverages is basically, as I mentioned, the flavor of the milk, which is the condensed milk for sure, and sweetness and the coffee flavor. And I do like double espresso shots and the coffee and the drink.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chef. Uh, do you have anything to add or any advice to give to young aspiring chefs or young aspiring baristas who are looking or who are interested in pursuing a career in coffee?
Yes, for sure. And my personal advice will be, to take time, to be passionate, to be patient as well during the process. It's coffee is definitely a world that you cannot achieve whatever you want in, let's say, in a couple of days. It takes time for sure. Uh, Follow your passion, follow your passion. Uh, be patient, and for sure try to explore more, visit more coffee roasters, visit for example, as I mentioned, that already the kingdom already started planting their own coffee. uh, why not to go and give them a visit, start to مثلا, for example, see the coffee beans, smell the coffee beans, taste the coffee beans, try to do experiments at your home, and give it a chance, or give it the time needed in order to have all the knowledge. Does not come easily. It does not come easily at all.
Well said, Chef. Thank you very much for that. And thank, yes, please. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for your time today. I personally learned a lot, and I hope our attendees did as well. If we do not have any more questions at this point, we have come to the end of our session today, or our workshop today. Thank you, Chef, and thank you, Zadek, for participating in this webinar and workshop, and we look forward to working with you further in the future.
Thank you again, Farah, for being here with us today. And for sure, I would like to thank Zadek and Godi again for giving us this opportunity for delivering such an webinar. I hope it was informative, and I hope definitely I was successful in delivering the message at the end of the day.
Thank you very much, Chef. And if any of the attendees or people you tell about this session have any further questions to Chef Yusuf about coffee or about anything else, please feel free to post your questions on one of the last 3 posts on Goody Culinary Solutions Instagram page. Thank you very much, and I wish you a beautiful day ahead.
Thank you so much.